She collapsed on this frozen ground, 5 days without food, invisible to a town that had already decided she didn't exist. But when the single father's shadow fell across her trembling body, everything changed. One command, pack your things, you're coming home, would shatter the silence she'd been drowning in for 6 months. This is the story of Mara Ellison, a woman who'd been beaten into a ghost by the man who promised to love her, and Evan Reyes, the widowed father who saw her when no one else would. Stay until the end and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The cold bit through Mara Ellison's threadbare coat like teeth through paper. 5 days. 5 days since she'd last eaten anything more substantial than melted snow and the bitter taste of her own fear. Her hands shook as she clutched the rusted coins, 7 quarters, 3 dimes, 2 nickels, counting them again, though she'd memorized their worth hours ago. $1.65. Not enough for the loaf of bread she could see through the clouded window of Morton's general store, but maybe, just maybe, enough for something, anything. Cedar Hollow, population 2,847, had exactly 3 places that sold food. 2 had closed their doors the moment they saw her coming. This was her last chance. The November wind screamed through the valley, carrying with it the promise of early snow. Mara's stomach cramped violently, a pain so familiar now it had become almost comfortable in its predictability. She'd learned to recognize the stages of starvation over the past 6 months. First came the constant gnawing hunger, then the weakness that made her limbs feel like they were made of wet newspaper, then the dizziness, the spots in her vision, the way sounds seemed to come from underwater. She was well into stage 4 now, the stage where her body had started consuming itself, where her mind played tricks, where she sometimes couldn't remember if the past hour had been real or imagined. Through the window, she could see old Mrs. Morton behind the counter, her gray hair pulled back in the same tight bun she'd worn for 30 years. The woman's eyes flickered toward the glass, met Mara's gaze for a split second, then deliberately looked away. The message was clear. You're not welcome here either. But Mara was beyond pride, beyond shame, beyond everything except the animal need to survive one more day. She pushed open the door. The bell above jangled, a cheerful sound that felt obscene given everything. The warmth of the store hit her like a physical force, and she swayed on her feet. 3 other customers stood in various aisles. Janet Hughes with her twin daughters, picking through canned vegetables. Thomas Creek, the mechanic, paying for cigarettes at the counter. And near the back, partially hidden by a display of motor oil, a tall man in a canvas jacket she didn't recognize, a stranger, or at least someone she'd never noticed before in all her years of living in Cedar Hollow. Mrs. Morton's face hardened the moment Mara stepped inside. We're closed. The sign says open until 6. Mara's voice came out as barely a whisper, her vocal cords weak from disuse. She'd stopped speaking weeks ago after she realized that every word she uttered in this town was met with suspicion, disgust, or worse, Calder's particular brand of charming lies. I said we're closed. Mrs. Morton crossed her arms. To you. Janet Hughes had turned to stare, herding her daughters behind her as if Mara carried something contagious. Thomas Creek muttered something under his breath and hurried out, the bell jangling again in his wake. The tall man by the motor oil had gone very still, watching. Please. Mara set the coins on the counter, each one clicking against the worn wood. I have money. I just need a little food. Anything. Crackers. A can of soup. Please. That money's no good here. Mrs. Morton didn't even glance at the coins. We don't serve thieves. The word hit like a slap. I never stole anything. That's not what your husband says. Mrs. Morton's voice carried the righteousness of someone who'd never questioned a single thing they'd been told. Says you took jewelry, cash, personal items when you ran off. Says you're mentally unstable, that you need help. Says he's been worried sick trying to find you, trying to get you the treatment you need. Mara felt the room tilt. This was Calder's work, his poison spreading through the town like rot through wood. He'd gotten here first, planted his story, made her the villain before she could even speak. It was the same tactic he'd used to isolate her from her friends, her family, her job. Tell the lie first, tell it convincingly, Tell it to everyone who matters, and by the time the truth tries to surface, no one wants to hear it." "He's lying," Mara said, but even to her own ears, her voice sounded weak, unconvincing. "How do you prove a negative? How do you prove you didn't steal from the man who'd stolen everything from you? Your confidence, your voice, your very sense of reality." "Of course you'd say that." Mrs. Morton shook her head sadly, as if dealing with a particularly difficult child. "Calder warned us you might show up making accusations. He showed me the police report, honey, the psychiatrist's evaluation. I know you think you're telling the truth, but you're sick. You need help." What police report? What evaluation?" Mara's heart hammered against her ribs. "I never saw a psychiatrist. You need to leave now." Mrs. Morton reached under the counter, and Mara knew what she was reaching for. The phone. Maybe the shotgun old Mr. Morton had kept there before he died. "Or I'm calling Sheriff Tompkins. He's already got instructions to bring you straight to Calder if anyone sees you." Of course he did. Sheriff Tompkins and Calder played poker every Thursday night. They'd been friends since high school. The entire apparatus of this town's protection had been turned into a cage with her name on it. Mara grabbed her coins, her hands shaking so badly that 2 quarters fell to the floor and rolled away. She didn't chase them. Couldn't. Her vision was going dark at the edges, and she knew if she bent down, she might not get back up. "I'm sorry to see you like this. I truly am, Mrs." Morton continued, her voice taking on that particular tone of pity that felt worse than hatred. "Calder's a good man. He just wants to help you. Why don't you go home to him? Let him take care of you?" Because home was where he broke my ribs. Because care meant his fists and his carefully chosen words that cut deeper than any physical blow. Because I would rather starve on these streets than spend one more night in that house watching my own soul die by degrees. But Mara didn't say any of that. She'd learned that lesson too well. The truth didn't matter when no one wanted to hear it. She turned toward the door, each step requiring monumental effort. The warm air that had felt so welcoming now felt suffocating. She could feel the eyes on her back, Janet Hughes, Mrs. Morton, even the stranger who'd stayed silent through the entire exchange. The bell jangled again as she pushed through the door. The cold hit her like a physical blow. She made it 3 steps before her legs gave out. The sidewalk rushed up to meet her, concrete kissing her knees, her palms. She heard the coins scatter, ping, 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 rolling away into the gathering darkness. Her last $1.65 disappearing into the cracks of Cedar Hollow along with every other thing she'd lost. 5 days without food. 6 months running from a husband who'd turned her existence into a living nightmare. 3,000 miles from the parents who'd stopped believing her years ago, who'd sided with charming, successful Calder over their own daughter because he'd told his lies first and told them well. No friends left. Calder had made sure of that, cutting her off one by one with perfectly crafted stories about her episodes, her instability, her unfounded accusations. Mara pressed her cheek against the frozen concrete and felt something in her chest give up. Not her heart, that kept beating with stubborn, stupid persistence, but something deeper. Hope, maybe, or whatever had been keeping her running for all these months. The sky above had gone purple with twilight. Soon it would be full dark, and she'd have to find somewhere to sleep. The abandoned construction site on Maple Street, maybe, where there was a tarp she could crawl under, or the basement window of the old Presbyterian church that didn't quite close all the way. Small victories in a war she was losing, one day at a time. She heard footsteps, heavy boots on concrete. Someone was coming out of Morton's store. Mara tried to push herself up, failed, tried again. She didn't want to be seen like this, sprawled on the sidewalk like trash, like proof of every lie Calder had told about her, but her arms wouldn't hold her weight. The footsteps stopped beside her. "Ma'am?" The voice was male, deep, with a mountain accent that spoke of generations in these hills. Not Calder, wrong timbre, wrong cadence. Mara managed to turn her head enough to see boots. Work boots, scarred leather, mud on the soles. Above them, canvas pants. She couldn't see higher than that without moving, and moving seemed impossible. "Can you hear me?" The voice came closer as the man crouched down. "I'm going to help you sit up." "No." The word came out as barely a breath. "Please, just go away." "Can't do that." Hands, large, calloused, surprisingly gentle, gripped her shoulders. You're going to freeze to death out here, or break something. Neither of those are happening on my watch. He lifted her like she weighed nothing, because she didn't, not anymore. Mara felt herself being shifted into a sitting position against the storefront wall. The world spun violently, and she tasted bile in the back of her throat. When her vision cleared, she found herself looking into a face that seemed carved from the same stone as the mountains surrounding Cedar Hollow. Sharp cheekbones, a jaw that could cut glass. Dark eyes that studied her with an intensity that should have been frightening, but somehow wasn't. Maybe because those eyes held something she hadn't seen in a long time. Not pity, not suspicion, but a kind of measuring assessment, as if he were looking at a problem to be solved rather than a person to be judged. When did you last eat? Mara opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Why do you care? Something flickered across the man's face. Pain, maybe, or recognition. Because someone cared for me once when I needed it. Your turn. When? 5 days. The admission fell out before she could stop it. Maybe 6. I lose track sometimes. The man's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath the skin. He stood, turned, and walked back into the store without another word. Mara sat against the wall, too weak to do anything else. Part of her brain noted that she should be frightened, vulnerable, with a strange man who might report her to Calder, might hurt her himself, might do any number of things. But the larger part of her brain was occupied with the simple mechanics of breathing, of staying conscious, of existing for one more minute. Through the store window, she could see the man talking to Mrs. Morton. The old woman was shaking her head, gesturing. The man pulled out his wallet, more head shaking. The man set down a handful of bills on the counter. Mara could see even from here that it was far too much for whatever he was buying. Then he turned and started loading items into a bag. Mrs. Morton protested, but the man ignored her, moving through the aisles with purposeful efficiency. 2 minutes later, he emerged with a paper bag under one arm. He crouched down in front of Mara again, set the bag between them, and pulled out a bottle of water. Drink this, slowly. Your stomach's going to want to rebel, but you need to keep it down. Mara stared at the bottle like it might bite her. Why are you doing this? Because you need help. He twisted the cap off and held it out. And because I've got a pretty good idea of what you're running from, and I'll be damned if I add to it. Those words, simple, matter-of-fact, without judgment, broke something in Mara's chest. Her hands shook so badly she almost dropped the bottle when she took it. The water was cold, clean, the most beautiful thing she'd tasted in days. She forced herself to drink slowly, though every cell in her body screamed to gulp it down. The man watched her with that same measuring look. I'm Evan Reyes. I live about 6 miles outside town, got a cabin, a wood shop, and a 7-year-old son who's probably wondering where I am right now. He paused. And I've got a guest room that hasn't been used in 2 years. Mara lowered the bottle, water dribbling down her chin. I can't. You can't stay out here. It's 28 degrees, going down to 15 tonight. Storm's coming in by midnight. Evan pulled a sandwich out of the bag. Turkey, by the smell of it, with lettuce and tomato, and held it out. Eat while you think about it. But there's really only one smart choice here. You don't know me. You don't know what I... Mara stopped, the old script dying on her lips. What I did. What I am. What Calder says I am. You don't know anything about me. I know you collapsed in front of a store because you haven't eaten in almost a week. I know this town's turned its back on you for reasons that don't make much sense if you actually think about them. And I know that look in your eyes. Evan's voice went quieter, rougher. I've seen it before. On someone I loved. Someone I couldn't save. The last sentence hung in the cold air between them, heavy with meanings Mara didn't have the strength to unpack. I have a husband, she heard herself say, and immediately hated the words, hated that this was still the first thing she thought of, the first defense mechanism that sprang up even now. He'll be looking for me. Then he can look. Evan stood, offering his hand. But tonight, you're going to eat real food, sleep in a warm bed, and not die on this sidewalk. Everything else we'll figure out tomorrow. Mara stared at the offered hand, large, scarred, with calluses that spoke of hard work and honest labor. A hand that had just bought her food when no one else would, that had lifted her with unexpected gentleness, that was offering something that looked impossibly like kindness. She thought of the abandoned construction site, the church basement window, the long, cold night ahead, and all the nights after that stretching into an uncertain future. Thought of Calder's reach, his carefully constructed lies, his ability to make people believe that black was white and cruelty was love. Thought of 5 days without food, 6 months without safety, 28 years without anyone who'd looked at her the way this stranger was looking at her now, like she was worth saving. "I'm Mara," she whispered. "Mara Ellison." "Nice to meet you, Mara Ellison." Evan's hand didn't waver. "Now let's get you somewhere warm before my son sends out a search party." Mara took his hand. The truck was older, but clean and well-maintained. Evan helped her into the passenger seat with the same careful efficiency he'd shown on the sidewalk, not touching her more than necessary, giving her space to settle. The interior smelled like sawdust and pine, with a child's jacket crumpled in the back seat and a drawing taped to the dashboard, stick figures labeled "Me" and "Daddy," holding hands under a smiling sun. Mara clutched the paper bag to her chest as Evan started the engine. The heater kicked on, blowing dusty, warm air that made her shiver violently. "Eat the sandwich," Evan said, pulling out onto Main Street. "Trust me on this. You need food in your stomach before we get to the cabin, or you're going to pass out from the warmth alone." Mara unwrapped the sandwich with shaking fingers. The first bite was careful, tentative. The second was less so. By the third, she had to consciously slow herself down, her stomach cramping with the sudden influx of food after days of emptiness. They drove in silence through Cedar Hollow's main street, past the post office and the hardware store, past the diner where Mara had once worked before Calder convinced her boss she was unstable and got her fired. The town rolled past the windows like a judgment, every lit window a reminder of normal lives she was no longer part of. "How long have you been in Cedar Hollow?" Evan asked after they'd left the town limits behind. 18 months. Mara forced down another bite. "We moved here from Richmond after Calder got a job managing the mill." "Briggs Mill?" "Yes." The word came out flat. Of course Evan would know Calder. Everyone knew Calder. Charming, successful, pillar of the community Calder Briggs. "I've met your husband." Evan's voice was carefully neutral. "Once, maybe twice. He came to my wood shop wanting custom furniture for his office." Mara's throat closed. Did you make it for him?" "No." Evan took a turn onto a narrow gravel road that climbed into the foothills. "Something about him didn't sit right. Couldn't put my finger on it at the time, but I've learned to trust my gut." The admission hung in the air between them. Mara didn't know what to do with it, this casual acknowledgement that Calder, beloved Calder, might not be everything he appeared to be. "He told everyone I stole from him," she said quietly, "that I'm mentally ill, that I ran away because I'm having a breakdown." "And did you? Steal?" "No." Mara laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "The breakdown, though. That part might be true. Does it count as a breakdown when the world actually is trying to kill you?" Evan glanced at her, then back at the road. "Tell me what he did to you." The question was so direct, so devoid of judgment, that Mara felt her careful defenses crack. "Why would you believe me? No one else does." "Because I watched you count rusted coins for 5 minutes before you found the courage to walk into that store. Because you flinched when I touched your shoulder, but not when I lifted you. Muscle memory that says you're used to violence coming from touches that start gentle. Because you've got a healed fracture on your left wrist that didn't set quite right, probably 6 or 7 months old, and a scar above your eyebrow that's trying to hide under your hair." Evan's voice remained level, factual. "And because I've seen what it looks like when someone's been systematically destroyed by the person who promised to love them." Mara pressed her hand to the old break on her wrist, a movement so automatic she didn't realize she was doing it until she'd already done it. "He'll come looking for me. When he finds out you helped me, let him come." There was something cold and final in those 3 words. "I'm not afraid of Calder Briggs." They climbed higher into the mountains, the road getting rougher, civilization falling away behind them. Pine trees pressed close on either side, their branches heavy with the promise of coming snow. Mara finished the sandwich and started on the apple Evan had packed, her stomach both grateful and rebellious at the sudden food. "Your wife," she said after a long stretch of silence. "The person you couldn't save. What happened?" Evan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. For a moment, Mara thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Cancer. Pancreatic. 18 months from diagnosis to death. She was 32. Leo was 5. "I'm sorry." "Me too." Evan turned onto an even narrower path, barely more than 2 tracks through the trees. "She made me promise, at the end, that I wouldn't let the grief make me hollow. That I'd keep seeing people, keep helping where I could, keep being the man she married instead of just the ghost of him." He glanced at Mara. "So here we are." Here they were indeed. The cabin materialized out of the darkness like something from a fairy tale. 2 stories of log construction with warm light glowing from the windows and smoke curling from a stone chimney. A woodshed stood to one side, and what looked like a workshop beyond it. The whole scene was almost painfully normal, painfully safe, painfully unlike anything Mara had experienced in the past 18 months. "Leo's probably climbed onto the kitchen counter by now, trying to reach the cookies I specifically told him were for after dinner," Evan said, parking the truck. "Fair warning, he's going to have a lot of questions. You don't have to answer any of them." Mara nodded, suddenly unable to speak around the lump in her throat. They got out of the truck. The cold bit harder up here in the mountains, but it was a clean cold, free of the judgment and suspicion that had clung to Cedar Hollow's air. Mara followed Evan up the porch steps, her legs shaking with exhaustion and residual hunger and the sheer overwhelming strangeness of being here, being helped, being seen. Evan opened the door. "Leo, we've got a guest." The interior of the cabin rushed over Mara in a wave of warmth and light. Handmade furniture, a dining table that could seat 8, chairs with carved backs, a rocking chair by the fireplace that looked like it had been built with both skill and love. Photographs on the walls, mostly of a woman with kind eyes and a 7-year-old boy who'd inherited his father's sharp features. The floor was clean swept wood, scattered with child's toys and a pair of small sneakers kicked off haphazardly by the door. And standing in the kitchen doorway, 1 foot propped on the bottom shelf of the counter, a cookie in each hand and guilt written all over his face, was Leo Reyes. The boy froze when he saw Mara. His eyes, same dark brown as his father's, went wide. "Leo," Evan said in a tone that managed to convey both exasperation and affection, "get down from there before you break your neck. And yes, I saw the cookies." Leo scrambled down, still clutching his contraband. "You were gone forever. I got hungry." "I was gone 45 minutes. "That's forever when you're hungry." Leo's attention swung back to Mara, open curiosity replacing the initial surprise. "Who's that?" "This is Miss Mara. She's going to be staying with us for a while." Evan moved into the kitchen, gesturing for Mara to follow. "Mara, this is Leo. He's 7. He's hungry exactly 90% of the time, and he has approximately 0 sense of self-preservation." "Hey," Leo protested, "I have some sense of self-preservation. You tried to pet a raccoon last week. He looked friendly." Despite everything, the exhaustion, the fear, the surreal strangeness of being in this warm cabin with these 2 people she didn't know, Mara felt her lips twitch. Almost a smile. Almost. Leo studied her with the frank assessment that only children can manage without being rude. "Are you sick? You look sick." "Leo, it's okay." Mara's voice came out hoarse but steady. "I am sick, but I'm going to get better." "That's good." Leo offered one of his cookies to her. "This will help. Cookies make everything better." The gesture, so simple, so pure, so unburdened by the complications of adult suspicion and judgment, made something crack in Mara's chest. She took the cookie with shaking hands. "Thank you." "You're welcome." Leo turned to his father. "Can we have spaghetti for dinner? Miss Mara looks like she needs spaghetti." Evan met Mara's eyes over his son's head, and in that look was an entire conversation. "This is us. This is what you're walking into. Chaos and questions, and a 7-year-old who thinks cookies and spaghetti can heal the world. If that's too much, you can still leave. But Mara found she didn't want to leave. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Spaghetti sounds perfect, she whispered. Migat. Dinner was a quiet affair, mainly because Mara could barely stay awake long enough to eat. Evan had made simple spaghetti with marinara sauce, garlic bread, and a salad that Mara forced herself to eat, even though vegetables felt impossibly foreign after days of nothing. Leo chattered through the meal, telling stories about school and his best friend Marcus, and the squirrel that lived in the oak tree outside his window. And had he mentioned the raccoon incident because it was actually really cool, right up until it wasn't. Mara listened with half her attention, the other half occupied with the simple act of eating, of keeping food down, of existing in this warm kitchen with these people who weren't Calder. Evan watched her carefully but not obtrusively, making sure she ate, but not pushing when she couldn't manage more than a few bites. After dinner, Evan led her upstairs to a bedroom that was clearly the guest room Leo had mentioned. Clean but clearly unused, with that particular stillness that comes from rooms that haven't held life in a while. The bed was made with a patchwork quilt, the dresser clear except for a vase of dried flowers. "Bathroom's across the hall," Evan said, setting down the paper bag from the store that still held a few items. "There's shampoo, soap, clean towels in the cabinet. Help yourself to anything you need." Mara stood in the center of the room, overwhelmed by the simple fact of it. A bed. A real bed with clean sheets and a quilt that looked handmade. A window with curtains. A door that would close, that would lock if she needed it to. "Why are you doing this?" The question came out raw. "You don't know me. I could be everything Calder says I am." Evan leaned against the doorframe, studying her. "Could be. But you're not. I've lived with the truth long enough to recognize a lie when I see one." He paused. "My wife, Sarah, at the end, she couldn't eat either, couldn't keep anything down. And I'd have given anything, done anything, for someone to help her, to give her one more day of feeling human. I'm not dying." "No, you're not, but you were getting close." Evan straightened. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow we'll figure out next steps. But tonight, you're safe. That's all that matters." He closed the door gently behind him. Mara stood in the silence for a long moment. Then she walked to the bed and sat down, just sat, feeling the give of the mattress, the weight of the quilt. Through the floorboards, she could hear Leo's voice, high and excited, and Evan's deeper rumble in response. Normal sounds, family sounds, the kind of sounds she'd stopped believing were possible. She should shower. She knew she should. She hadn't properly bathed in over a week, had been sleeping rough, was probably carrying God knows what kind of dirt and grime. But the exhaustion was a physical weight pressing her down, and the bed was so soft, and for the first time in 6 months, she felt something that might almost be safety. Mara lay down, fully clothed, and pulled the quilt over her shoulders. She was asleep before she could count to 10, dropping into darkness so complete and absolute that not even nightmares could follow her there. Downstairs, Evan sat in his workshop long after Leo had gone to bed. The lathe sat silent in the corner, half-finished chair legs scattered across the workbench. He should be working, had 3 orders to complete before the end of the month, but his hands were still, his mind elsewhere. He'd seen the bruises, old ones, faded to yellow-green, circling her upper arms in fingerprint patterns. Had seen the way she'd flinched when Mrs. Morton raised her voice, the way her entire body had gone tense when he'd mentioned Calder Briggs. Evan knew violence when he saw it, knew control, knew the particular kind of destruction that came from someone who hurt you with one hand while holding you with the other. Sarah had made him promise not to become hollow, but she'd never said anything about not becoming angry. And Evan was discovering, as he sat in the quiet dark of his workshop with a stranger sleeping upstairs and his son dreaming in the next room, that he was very, very angry at Calder Briggs, at this town that had turned away from someone in need, at a world that let men like Briggs wear respectability like a coat, while women like Mara Ellison starved on sidewalks. But anger wasn't enough. Sarah had taught him that too. You had to do something with it, channel it, make it mean something. Evan stood, walked to the window, looked out at the dark forest pressing close around his cabin. Somewhere out there was Calder Briggs, probably sitting in his comfortable house, probably thinking his wife was still lost, still vulnerable, still his to hunt and reclaim. Let him think that. Let him keep thinking that right up until the moment he learned otherwise. I've got her, Evan said quietly to the darkness, to Sarah's memory, to whatever part of his wife still listened from wherever she'd gone. I've got her, and I'm not letting go. The forest didn't answer, but then again, it didn't have to. Evan turned off the workshop light and headed upstairs, checking on Leo, sprawled across his bed in the boneless way only children could manage, before stopping at the guest room door. He listened for a moment, heard the soft, even breathing of deep sleep. Good. She needed it, needed days of it probably, along with regular meals and safety and time to remember that she was human, not just a thing to be hunted. Evan went to his own room, but it was a long time before he slept. And when he finally did, his dreams were full of shadows and the ghosts of promises he'd made to a dying woman about staying human, staying open, staying willing to help when help was needed. He hadn't known, when he made those promises, how much they would cost. But he was learning. Mara woke to the smell of coffee and pancakes, and for one disoriented moment, thought she was back in her childhood home, waking to her mother's Sunday breakfast. Then reality crashed back. The guest room, the cabin, Evan Reyes and his son Leo, the impossible kindness that had brought her here. Sunlight streamed through the window, bright and clean. She'd slept through the night without waking once, without nightmares, without that constant hypervigilance that had become her default state. Her body ached in strange ways, the ache of a full stomach, of muscles finally able to relax, of sleep so deep it felt like resurrection. She sat up slowly, taking inventory. Her clothes were wrinkled, slept in, carrying the accumulated grime of too many days without proper washing. Her hair felt matted and dirty, but she was alive, fed, safe, at least for this moment. The clock on the nightstand read 9:15. She'd slept for almost 12 hours. Voices drifted up from downstairs. Leo's high chatter and Evan's deeper responses, the ordinary morning conversation of a father and son. Mara stood, her legs steadier than they'd been in days, and made her way to the bathroom across the hall. The face in the mirror shocked her. She'd avoided mirrors for weeks now, but there was no avoiding this one. The woman staring back was a stranger, hollow-cheeked with shadows under her eyes so deep they looked like bruises. Her hair hung lank and lifeless. Her skin had the grayish pallor of malnutrition. This was what 6 months of running, of hiding, of slow starvation looked like. This was what Calder had made her into. The anger that flared in her chest was small but fierce. She clung to it like a lifeline. The shower was hot and strong, and Mara stood under the spray until her skin turned pink, scrubbing away layers of fear and dirt and defeat. She washed her hair 3 times, watching the water run gray, then clear. Found clean towels in the cabinet like Evan had said, soft and smelling of lavender detergent. When she finally emerged, wrapped in towels with steam still clinging to the mirror, she felt almost human again. But she had no clean clothes, nothing but the filthy jeans and sweater she'd been wearing for 5 days straight. A soft knock on the bathroom door made her freeze. "Miss Mara?" Leo's voice, tentative. "Dad said to give you these. He said your clothes probably need washing." Mara cracked the door open. Leo stood there holding a stack of folded clothing, sweatpants, a t-shirt, a flannel button-down that would swallow her whole. His eyes were carefully fixed on the floor, giving her privacy. "Thank you, Leo." "You're welcome." He paused. "Dad made pancakes. Like, a lot of pancakes. He always makes too many when he's nervous." "Is he nervous?" "Yeah." Leo looked up, his dark eyes serious. "He's worried you're going to leave before you're better. He gets like this sometimes, all quiet and weird." The honesty in the child's voice was startling. "I'm not leaving yet," Mara found herself saying. "I promise." Leo's face broke into a grin. "Good, because I already told Marcus at school I had a house guest, and he didn't believe me, and now I can prove it." He turned to go, then stopped. "Also, the pancakes are really good. You should probably hurry before I eat them all." He thundered down the stairs, and Mara closed the door with something that felt dangerously close to a smile on her face. The clothes were comically large, Evan's, obviously, but they were clean and warm and smelled like cedar and wood smoke. Mara rolled up the sweatpants and sleeves, cinched the waist as tight as she could, and studied herself in the now clear mirror. Still gaunt, still carrying the shadows of trauma in her eyes, but cleaner, more present, almost like a person instead of a ghost. She gathered her dirty clothes and made her way downstairs. The kitchen was a scene of controlled chaos. Leo sat at the table with a stack of pancakes taller than seemed physically possible for a 7-year-old to consume, drowning them in syrup with the focused intensity of someone diffusing a bomb. Evan stood at the stove, flipping another pancake, his back to the stairs. He'd changed into clean work clothes, his dark hair still damp from his own shower. "There's a laundry room off the back porch," Evan said without turning around, somehow sensing her presence. "Washer and dryer both work. Detergent's on the shelf." Mara clutched her bundle of dirty clothes. "I can wash these myself. I don't want to be—" "I know you can." Evan plated the pancake and finally turned to face her. Something flickered in his eyes when he saw her in his clothes, an emotion too complex to name. "But you're still weak, and I need you to eat before you do anything else. Leo, get Miss Mara a plate." Leo jumped up with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been waiting for exactly this mission, grabbing a plate from the cabinet and setting it at the empty place across from his spot. "How many pancakes do you want?" "Dad made like 50. "I made 12, Evan corrected. "You've eaten 4. "That's basically 50. Despite herself, despite everything, Mara laughed. It came out rusty, unpracticed, but it was real. Leo beamed at her like she'd given him a gift. She sat down, and Evan brought over a plate with 3 pancakes and a mug of coffee. Black, steaming, perfect. The first bite of pancake was fluffy and sweet, made with what tasted like buttermilk and vanilla. The second bite was even better. By the third, Mara had to consciously slow herself down, her stomach still adjusting to regular food. "Take your time," Evan said, sitting down with his own plate and coffee. "Your body needs to remember what to do with food. Push too hard and you'll make yourself sick." They ate in companionable silence for a while, Leo chattering between bites about school and his teacher, Miss Henderson, and how they were learning about the Oregon Trail and could they get a covered wagon. "Dad, please?" "No. But it would be educational. We live in Virginia. Where would we even put a covered wagon? In the backyard. Duh." Evan caught Mara's eye and shook his head with the long-suffering expression of a parent who'd had this exact argument multiple times. Mara felt that dangerous, almost smile again, threatening to become real. After breakfast, Leo was dispatched to get ready for school with instructions to brush his teeth, actually thoroughly this time, not just wave the toothbrush near his mouth. Evan gathered the dishes and Mara moved to help automatically. "You don't have to." "I know." Mara picked up her plate. "But I want to. Please, let me help." Evan studied her for a moment, then nodded. They washed dishes side by side, Evan washing, Mara drying, and putting away under his quiet direction about where things went. It was domestic, ordinary, the kind of simple task that shouldn't have felt profound, but somehow did. 6 months ago, doing dishes with Calder had been a minefield. Every glass not perfectly clean, every fork in the wrong slot, a reason for criticism, for that particular tone of voice that cut deeper than shouting ever could. But Evan just washed dishes, didn't comment, didn't correct, just worked alongside her in comfortable silence. "I need to take Leo to school," Evan said as they finished. "Bus doesn't come out this far. I'll be gone about 45 minutes. 20 minutes there, 5 minutes of Leo trying to convince me he needs money for the vending machine even though I pack his lunch. 20 minutes back." Mara tensed. "I'll be fine. I know you will be. Just wanted you to know where I'd be." Evan dried his hands on a dish towel. "There's food in the fridge and pantry. Help yourself to anything. TV remote's on the coffee table if you want to watch something. Books in the living room, the door locks from the inside, and the spare keys hanging by the back door if you need to go out for any reason." He was giving her escape routes, Mara realized. Telling her where everything was, how to leave if she needed to, making sure she didn't feel trapped. The consideration in that gesture made her throat tight. "I'll still be here when you get back," she said quietly. Evan's shoulders relaxed slightly, tension she hadn't even noticed easing. "Good." Leo came barreling down the stairs, backpack bouncing, one shoe on and the other in his hand. "Ready! Let's go! Miss Henderson's going to show us real wagon wheels today, and I don't want to be late." "Other shoe, Leo." "Oh, right." Leo hopped around putting on his shoe, then stopped in front of Mara. Are you going to be here when I get home? Yes. Promise? The word was so simple, so trusting, asked with the absolute faith that promises meant something. Mara felt something crack in her chest. I promise. Okay, good, because I want to show you my rock collection. I have 17 rocks. Well, 16 now. One of them was actually a potato, but I didn't realize until it started sprouting. Leo, we talked about the difference between rocks and vegetables. I know, but it was a really hard potato. Evan herded his son toward the door, grabbing his own jacket and keys. He paused at the threshold, looking back at Mara. 45 minutes. Lock the door behind us if it makes you feel safer. Then they were gone, Leo's voice fading as they headed to the truck. Something about Marcus and wagon wheels, and could they please get a potato that looked like a rock, or maybe a rock that looked like a potato for show and tell? The cabin settled into silence. Mara stood in the kitchen, surrounded by the debris of normal family life. Leo's jacket thrown over a chair, Evan's work gloves on the counter, a shopping list held to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a bear. Evidence of lives being lived, of routines and responsibilities, and the ordinary passage of days. She walked through the downstairs, taking it in properly now. The living room with its handmade furniture. She could see Evan's craftsmanship in every piece. The careful joinery, the smooth finish. Photographs everywhere, mainly of a woman who must be Sarah, laughing in a garden, holding a newborn Leo, standing beside Evan on what looked like their wedding day. The woman had been beautiful, with warm brown skin and eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled. In every photo with Evan, their body language spoke of easy affection, comfortable love, the kind of partnership that didn't need to perform for the camera. Mara stopped in front of one particular photo. Sarah, clearly ill, her head wrapped in a bright scarf, sitting in the rocking chair by the fireplace with 5-year-old Leo on her lap. Both were laughing at something off camera. Even dying, even at the end, there was joy in that house. Love. Safety. Everything Mara's marriage had never been, even in the beginning. She turned away before the comparison could cut too deep and found herself in Evan's workshop. The space was clearly well used, tools hung neatly on pegboards, sawdust swept into corners, the air thick with the smell of wood and varnish. A half-finished rocking horse stood on the main workbench, its mane carved in delicate detail, waiting for paint. For Leo, probably. Or maybe for a customer. But something about the care taken in those carved details suggested this was personal work, love made tangible in wood and time. Mara backed out of the workshop, feeling like an intruder. This house, this life. It wasn't hers. Wasn't. She was just passing through. A temporary guest? Someone who would leave eventually because people like her didn't get to stay in places this good. The thought made her chest ache. She made her way back to the guest room and found the bag from Morton's store still sitting where Evan had left it. Inside was more than just the sandwich and apple from last night. A toothbrush, still in its package. A small bottle of shampoo, a hairbrush, bar soap, travel-size lotion. Basic necessities purchased by a man who'd seen someone in need and responded with practical kindness. Mara sat on the edge of the bed and cried for the first time in 6 months. Not the silent tears she'd shed in hiding, or the gasping sobs that had racked her in the early days of running. These were different, the tears of someone finally safe enough to break. She cried until she was empty, until there was nothing left but the hollow ache of exhaustion. Then she lay back on the bed, curled on her side, and let the silence of the cabin hold her. She didn't hear Evan return 45 minutes later. Didn't hear him pause at her open door, see her sleeping with tear tracks still wet on her face, and quietly close the door to give her privacy. Didn't hear him go back downstairs and sit at his kitchen table with his head in his hands, making calculations he'd been avoiding about spare bedrooms and guest stays, and how long was too long and how long was not long enough. What she did hear, when she woke 2 hours later, was the steady rhythm of someone working wood, the whir of a lathe, the rasp of sandpaper, the small sounds of creation. Normal sounds, safe sounds. The soundtrack of a life she was starting, despite every warning voice in her head, to imagine being part of. That afternoon, Mara ventured into the kitchen and found ingredients for soup. It was simple work, automatic. Chopping vegetables, measuring broth, the meditative rhythm of cooking. By the time she heard the truck returning with Leo, she'd made enough chicken noodle soup to feed a small army. Leo burst through the door like a small tornado, backpack flying, words spilling out in an unstoppable stream. "Miss Mara, you're still here. I told Marcus you were real, and Miss Henderson showed us the wagon wheels, and they were huge and heavy, and I learned that Oregon is really far away," and he stopped, sniffing the air. "What's that smell?" "Soup," Mara said, ladling some into a bowl for him. "I hope that's okay. I found the ingredients and thought, that's more than okay." Evan appeared in the doorway, sawdust in his hair and a half-smile on his face. "Leo, wash your hands, and maybe use soap this time." The afternoon dissolved into evening with the same easy routine. Homework at the kitchen table with Leo periodically asking questions that had nothing to do with math, and everything to do with whether Mara thought squirrels could understand English, and if rocks had feelings. Dinner. The soup and fresh bread Evan had somehow found time to bake. Leo's bath time, which involved extensive negotiations about how many toy boats constituted too many toy boats for one tub. Mara helped where she could, finding her place in the edges of their routine. Not intruding, not taking over, just being there. Present. Useful. Real. "Time for bed, buddy," Evan announced at 8:30, after Leo had just one more question his way through an extra 20 minutes of staying up. "But I didn't show Miss Mara my rock collection yet." "Tomorrow, I promise." "You always say tomorrow." "Because you always have 17 more things to do at bedtime." Evan pointed toward the stairs. "Brush teeth, put on pajamas, pick out 2 books, not 7. Leo trudged upstairs with the defeated air of someone facing tremendous injustice. Mara started clearing the dinner dishes, but Evan stopped her with a gentle hand on her arm. "You cooked. I clean. House rules." "I don't mind." "I know, but you're still recovering, and you made soup for an army, and I'm guessing you haven't sat down since I left this morning." Evan's voice was firm, but kind. "Sit. Rest. Let someone else do the work for once." Mara opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. When was the last time someone had told her to rest? When was the last time she'd been allowed to just be still? She sat. Evan moved through the kitchen with practiced efficiency, washing dishes, wiping counters, putting away leftovers. Upstairs, water ran as Leo brushed his teeth. Normal sounds, safe sounds, the rhythm of a household that functioned on mutual respect and shared responsibility instead of fear and control. "Dad!" Leo's voice echoed down. "I'm ready for books." "Oh, be right there." Evan dried his hands, then looked at Mara. "You're welcome to join us if you want. Fair warning. His taste in literature tends toward the bizarre. Last night we read a book about a dragon who was allergic to fire." "I don't want to intrude on your routine." "You're not intruding, but the offer stands." Evan headed for the stairs, then paused. "Mara, thank you. For the soup. For being here. It's good for Leo to see that sometimes people need help, and that helping is the right thing to do." He disappeared upstairs before Mara could respond. She sat in the quiet kitchen, listening to the muffled sounds of bedtime. Leo's excited voice, Evan's patient responses, the occasional burst of laughter. Outside the window, darkness pressed close, and somewhere beyond these mountains was Calder, still looking, still hunting, still convinced she was his to reclaim. But here, in this cabin, she was something else. Not prey, not a ghost, not the broken thing Calder had tried to make her into. Just Mara. A woman eating regular meals, helping with dishes, existing in a space where kindness was default instead of currency to be earned or withheld. It was terrifying. It was impossible. It was the most dangerous kind of hope. And God help her, she was starting to believe in it. The days that followed fell into a rhythm Mara had forgotten could exist. She'd wake to the smell of coffee and whatever breakfast Evan had decided to make. Pancakes, eggs, oatmeal with fresh fruit. She'd help with morning dishes, then wave goodbye as Evan took Leo to school. The hours alone in the cabin should have been frightening, but instead they became something else. A space to remember who she'd been before Calder, to piece together the fragments of the person he'd tried to erase. She cleaned. Not from obligation or fear, but because it gave her something to do, a way to contribute. She organized the pantry, scrubbed the bathroom until it gleamed, washed windows and folded laundry, and found a strange peace in the mundane tasks. This was cleaning without the terror of inspection, without Calder's voice in her ear cataloging every missed spot, every failure. She cooked. Simple things at first. Sandwiches, salads, reheated leftovers, then more complex meals as her confidence grew. Meatloaf and roasted vegetables, chicken and dumplings. A pot roast that filled the cabin with such rich smells that Leo declared it better than Thanksgiving, and could they have it every day, please? She started talking again. Her voice was rusty at first, words coming slow and careful. But Leo asked so many questions, about everything, about nothing, about whether clouds had names and if trees could be lonely, and did she think aliens would like pancakes, that eventually, inevitably, she answered. Short responses at first, then longer ones, then actual conversations that felt almost normal. And slowly, so slowly, she almost didn't notice, the hollow places inside her began to fill in. 2 weeks into her stay, Mara woke to the sound of someone crying. She was out of bed before conscious thought could catch up, her body moving on instinct down the hall toward Leo's room. The boy was tangled in his sheets, caught in the grip of a nightmare, whimpering in his sleep. Evan's door was still closed, probably hadn't heard yet, or was in that deep sleep of the exhausted. Mara sat on the edge of Leo's bed and touched his shoulder gently. "Leo, sweetheart, wake up. You're dreaming." Leo's eyes flew open, wild and unfocused. "Mom." The word cut off as he saw Mara's face, not his mother's, and fresh tears spilled down his cheeks. "I dreamed she came back, but then she left again, and I couldn't find her, and—" "Shh." Mara pulled him into her arms without thinking, the gesture pure instinct. "It was just a dream, just a bad dream. You're safe, you're home." Leo buried his face in her shoulder and sobbed, deep, wrenching sounds that spoke of a grief too large for a 7-year-old body to hold. Mara held him and rocked him, murmuring wordless comfort, and felt her own heart break for this child who'd lost his mother too young, who still woke crying for a woman who would never come back. "I miss her," Leo whispered against her shoulder. "I miss her so much, and Dad gets sad when I talk about her, and I don't want to make him sad, but I can't help it." "Your dad loves you," Mara said softly, "and he loved your mom. Sometimes people get sad because they loved someone so much, not because you did anything wrong. Do you understand?" Leo nodded against her shoulder. "And your mom—" Mara's voice caught, thinking of all the photographs downstairs, all the evidence of Sarah's love woven through this house. "Your mom loved you too, so much. I can see it everywhere in this house. In the pictures, in the way your dad talks about her, in the things she left behind for you." "Like what?" "Like the way your dad makes pancakes exactly the way you like them. Like the rocking chair in the living room where she read you stories. Like the little bear magnet on the fridge. I bet she picked that out, didn't she?" "Yeah." Leo's tears were slowing now, his breathing evening out. "She said every time I saw it, I should remember she loved me very much." He made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "She liked silly jokes. She sounds wonderful." She was. Leo pulled back to look at Mara with red-rimmed eyes. "Are you going to leave too?" The question hit like a physical blow. "Leo, everyone leaves. Mom left even though she didn't want to. My friend Jake's family moved to California. Even the good babysitters leave eventually." His small hands gripped her arms. "Are you going to leave?" Mara looked into those dark eyes so like Evan's, at this child who'd already lost too much, and felt something shift in her chest. "I don't know," she said, because she owed him honesty. "I don't know what happens next, but I promise you this, I'm not leaving right now. And when I do leave, if I do, it won't be because of you. It'll never be because of you." "Promise?" "I promise." Leo hugged her again, tight and fierce, and Mara held him until his breathing deepened and evened out into sleep. She laid him back down, tucked the covers around him, and turned to find Evan standing in the doorway. She had no idea how long he'd been there. His face was unreadable in the darkness, but something in his posture spoke of a man who'd just witnessed something he hadn't expected. They moved into the hallway without speaking, closing Leo's door softly behind them. "I heard him crying," Mara whispered. I didn't mean to overstep. You didn't. Evan's voice was rough. You did exactly what needed to be done. He ran a hand through his already messy hair. He has those dreams sometimes. Used to have them every night after Sarah died. They've gotten less frequent, but they still come. And I never... He stopped, struggling with words. I never know what to say. How to make it better when nothing can actually make it better. You love him. That's what makes it better. Mara wrapped her arms around herself. Even when it doesn't feel like enough. Evan looked at her for a long moment, and Mara saw something shift in his expression, recognition maybe, or understanding. Thank you, he said finally, for being there when he needed someone, for knowing what to say. I just said what was true. That's usually what people need to hear. Evan glanced back at Leo's door, then at Mara. Get some rest. Morning's going to come too early. He went back to his room, and Mara returned to hers, but sleep was slow to come. She lay in the darkness, thinking about Leo's question. Are you going to leave? And realized she didn't have a good answer. Didn't know if there was a good answer. Because the truth was, she was starting to feel things she had no right to feel. Attachment to Leo, who'd crept into her heart with his rock collections and terrible jokes and absolute trust. Comfort in Evan's presence, in the quiet competence with which he moved through the world. A sense of belonging in this cabin that should have felt temporary, but was starting to feel dangerously permanent. And underneath it all, the constant awareness that Calder was still out there, still looking, still convinced she belonged to him. It was only a matter of time before that reckoning came. The reckoning came 3 weeks later, on a Thursday afternoon, when the sky hung low and gray with the promise of snow. Mara was in the kitchen making bread, real bread, kneading dough with her hands, feeling the rhythm of push and fold that Sarah's handwritten recipe card had promised would yield the best damn dinner rolls you've ever tasted. Her hands had stopped shaking weeks ago. Her cheeks had filled out. She'd gained back maybe 10 of the pounds she'd lost, and her reflection in the window above the sink showed someone who was beginning to look alive again. She was humming, actually humming, some half-remembered tune from childhood, her voice soft but present. The realization made her pause mid-kneed, flour dusting her arms up to the elbows. When had she started humming? When had the silence inside her broken enough to let music back in? The sound of tires on gravel pulled her from the thought. Evan wasn't due back with Leo for another hour. The mail didn't come this far up the mountain. They weren't expecting visitors. They never had visitors, which had been one of the things that made this place feel so safe. Mara's hand stilled in the dough. Through the window, she could see a black SUV pulling into the clearing in front of the cabin. Expensive, clean, utterly out of place in this rough mountain setting. Her heart knew before her mind did. Her body remembered before conscious thought could catch up. The driver's door opened, and Calder Briggs stepped out. He looked exactly as he always had. Tall, well-built, handsome in that polished way that photographed well, and made people trust him on sight. Dark hair perfectly styled despite the wind. Expensive jacket over designer jeans. The smile he wore as he surveyed the cabin was the same smile he'd used to court her, to marry her, to convince an entire town that his wife was crazy and he was the patient, suffering husband. Mara's lungs forgot how to work. She stumbled backward from the window, her flour-covered hands leaving white prints on the counter, on her shirt, on everything she touched, as panic clawed up her throat. The bread, the humming, the dangerous, foolish belief that she could be safe here, all of it shattered in an instant. 2 other men got out of the SUV, both large, both wearing the kind of casual clothing that tried to look ordinary but didn't quite succeed. Hired muscle, probably, or friends from Calder's poker games who owed him favors. Men who would believe whatever Calder told them, who would help him drag his confused, unstable wife back home. Calder's gaze found the kitchen window. Found her. His smile widened, and even from this distance, Mara could see the triumph in it. Found you, finally. Did you really think you could run from me? Her hands were shaking again, flour falling like snow. She needed to move, needed to hide, to run, to do something other than stand frozen like prey before a predator. But her body had locked down. Every survival instinct that had kept her alive for 6 months suddenly offline in the face of the one threat she'd never fully escaped. Calder started toward the house. The front door. She hadn't locked the front door. Evan never locked it during the day. Why would he? Out here, so far from everything. But now Calder was on the porch. Now his hand was on the door handle. Now, Mara ran. Not outside. There was no outside, no escape, not with two other men covering the exits. She ran for the only thing that made sense in her panic blank mind. The phone. The landline on the wall by the refrigerator. Her hands left flower prints on the receiver as she grabbed it, as she started dialing Evan's cell number that she'd memorized without meaning to. The front door opened. "Mara, sweetheart." Calder's voice was warm honey and arsenic. "There you are. We've been so worried about you." She pressed the phone to her ear. It was ringing. "Pick up, Evan. Please pick up." Calder moved into the kitchen with the easy confidence of someone who owned every space he entered. The two men flanked him, blocking the doorway. "You can hang up the phone, love. We're just here to take you home, get you the help you need." "I don't need help." Mara's voice came out stronger than she felt. "I need you to leave." Now, we both know that's not true. Calder's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "You've been sick, Mara, very sick, running away, living in the woods, breaking into this poor man's house." "I didn't break in. Evan brought me here." "Evan." Calder said the name like it was something distasteful. "Yes, Mr. Reyes. The widower who's been, what did the sheriff call it, interfering in a domestic situation." He took a step closer. "I'm sure he meant well, but he doesn't understand. He doesn't know you like I do. Doesn't know about your episodes, your delusions. They're not delusions." But the phone was still ringing. Why wasn't Evan answering? "You beat me. You isolated me. I protected you." Calder's voice sharpened, just for a moment, before smoothing back into that reasonable tone he was so good at. "From yourself, from the things you imagined, from the paranoid fantasies that made you think everyone was against you." He held out his hand. "Come home, Mara, please. Let me help you." She looked at that outstretched hand and saw every time it had struck her, every bruise, every carefully placed injury that wouldn't show in clothes, every moment of terror disguised as concern. "No." The word came out clear and absolute, the first real no she'd spoken to him in 18 months of marriage. Calder's smile finally cracked. "That wasn't a request." He lunged forward, and Mara threw the phone at his head. It missed, clattering against the wall, but it bought her a second. She grabbed the bread knife from the counter. Not much of a weapon, serrated and dusted with flour, but something, anything. "Stay back." "Put the knife down, Mara." Calder's reasonable tone was gone now, replaced by the cold authority she remembered from late nights when he'd decided she needed to be taught a lesson. "You're embarrassing yourself. These gentlemen came all this way to help bring you home safely, and this is how you act? Like some kind of wild animal?" One of the men behind him shifted uncomfortably. Maybe seeing a terrified woman holding a bread knife was finally penetrating the story Calder had sold them. Maybe not. "I'm not going with you." Mara's hand was steady on the knife. "I'm not going anywhere with you ever again." "Yes, you are." Calder moved fast, faster than she remembered, knocking the knife from her hand and grabbing her wrist in one smooth motion. His grip was exactly as crushing as she remembered, fingers digging into the old break that had never quite healed right. "We're going home, and you're going to apologize to Mr. Reyes for abusing his hospitality, and then you're going to check yourself into the facility where you belong." "Let her go!" Evan's voice cut through the kitchen like a blade. He stood in the doorway, Leo pressed behind him, and Mara had never seen such cold fury on a human face. He'd come in through the back, must have parked the truck out of sight when he'd seen the SUV, must have gotten Leo somewhere safe before coming inside. His eyes found Mara, found Calder's hand on her wrist, and something dangerous settled over his features. "Mr. Reyes?" Calder's smile snapped back into place, but his hand didn't leave Mara's wrist. "I appreciate your kindness to my wife, but this is a private family matter. We'll be going now." "Your wife just told you no. I suggest you listen." "She's not well. She doesn't know what she's saying." Calder tugged Mara closer, and she felt the old terror rising, the knowledge that he was stronger, that he always won, that fighting only made it worse. I have documentation, medical records, police reports. She's unstable, delusional. She needs professional help. Funny thing about those police reports. Evan moved into the kitchen, his body positioning itself between Calder and the door where Leo still stood wide-eyed and frightened. I made some calls this week to the Richmond police. They have no record of any reports filed about Mara. No missing person report. No stolen property claims. Nothing. Calder's grip tightened until Mara gasped. Then they lost the paperwork. Bureaucracy, you know how it is. I also called the psychiatric facility you supposedly had her evaluated at. They've never heard of her. Evan's voice was deadly quiet. So either you're lying or you're so delusional yourself that you've convinced yourself these things are real. Either way, his eyes dropped to Calder's hand on Mara's wrist. Let her go. For a moment, nobody moved. The two men behind Calder exchanged glances, clearly recalculating whatever they'd been told about the situation. Leo's quiet breathing was the only sound. Then Calder laughed. It was a terrible sound, all pretense stripped away. You think you can keep her? You think some backwoods carpenter with a dead wife and a brat kid can protect her from me? He yanked Mara hard enough that she stumbled against him. She's mine. She's always been mine, and I will burn your whole life down before I let you take what belongs to me. Dad? Leo's voice was small, scared, and that Mara would think later was the mistake Calder made. Threatening Evan was one thing, but threatening Leo, implying that this fight would touch Evan's son, that flipped some fundamental switch. Evan moved. He crossed the kitchen in 3 strides, grabbed Calder's arm, and applied pressure to some point that made Calder's entire hand spasm open. Mara stumbled free, and Evan shoved her behind him in the same motion. You have 3 seconds to get out of my house, Evan said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. 1. Calder rubbed his wrist, rage and disbelief warring on his face. You're making a very big mistake. 2. The two men were already backing toward the door. Whatever they'd been promised, it clearly wasn't worth this. But Calder stood his ground, his handsome face twisted into something ugly. This isn't over. She's my wife. I have legal rights. 3. Evan slammed the front door in his face. The lock engaged with a solid click. Through the window, they watched Calder stand on the porch for a long moment, his chest heaving with fury. He said something to the two men, probably threats, probably promises of what would happen next. Then he turned and walked back to the SUV with the rigid posture of someone barely containing violence. The SUV started, reversed, disappeared down the mountain road. Only then did Evan's rigid control crack. He turned to Mara, and she saw her own terror reflected in his eyes. Are you hurt? Did he? I'm okay. Mara looked down at her wrist where Calder's fingers had left red marks. I'm okay. Leo rushed forward and wrapped his arms around her waist, pressing his face against her flour-dusted shirt. I was so scared. That man was mean. He was hurting you. I know, sweetheart. I know. Mara held him with shaking hands. But it's over now. He's gone. Except they all knew it wasn't over. Calder didn't give up, didn't accept defeat, didn't walk away from what he considered his. Evan pulled out his phone, already dialing. Sheriff Tompkins, this is Evan Reyes. I want to report a break-in and attempted kidnapping at my property. A pause. Yes, I know who it was. Calder Briggs and 2 other men. They tried to force Mara Ellison to leave against her will. Another pause, longer this time. I don't care what he told you, Henry. I was here. I saw what happened, and if you're not going to do your job, then I'll call the state police. Mara could hear the sheriff's response even from across the room, something placating, something about domestic situations and jurisdictions and needing to hear both sides. There is no both sides, Evan said, his voice hard. There's a man who broke into my home and assaulted a woman who was under my protection. You either come take a statement and do something about it, or I make some calls to people who will. He listened for another moment. 30 minutes. If you're not here, I'm assuming you've decided to be complicit in whatever happens next. He hung up. Will he come? Mara asked, though she already knew the answer. Probably. To cover his own ass, if nothing else. Evan crouched down to Leo's level. Buddy, I need you to go to your room for a little while. Can you do that for me? But I know you want to help, but the best thing you can do right now is give us some space to figure things out, okay? Leo looked between his father and Mara, then nodded slowly. You promise she's okay? I promise. And you promise that mean man won't come back? Evan's jaw tightened. I promise I won't let anything happen to either of you. It wasn't quite the same promise, but Leo seemed to accept it. He gave Mara one more fierce hug, then trudged upstairs with the reluctant weight of someone who knew the adults were lying about how okay everything was. Once they heard his door close, Evan turned to Mara. Tell me the truth. How bad is this going to get? Mara sat down heavily in one of the kitchen chairs, her legs finally giving out. Bad. He doesn't give up. He never gives up. When I first tried to leave, before I actually ran, he found me at my sister's house, convinced her I was having a breakdown, had me committed for 72 hours for a psychiatric evaluation. Her voice went flat with the memory. 3 days of being told I was crazy, that I'd imagined everything, that Calder was just concerned for my welfare. By the time they let me out, my sister wouldn't take my calls anymore. She believed him. Everyone always believes him. I don't. You should. Mara looked up at him, needing him to understand. You should believe him, and make me leave before he destroys everything you have. He meant what he said about burning your life down. He'll get you fired. He'll turn the town against you. He'll find a way to make you look like the villain and himself like the victim, and by the time he's done, you won't recognize your own life. Let him try. Evan sat down across from her. I'm not afraid of Calder Briggs. You should be. Why? Because he's got money and connections and a talent for lying? Evan shook his head. I've faced worse. I've watched my wife die by inches and couldn't do a damn thing to stop it. I've had to explain to my 5-year-old son why his mother wasn't coming home ever again. Whatever Briggs thinks he can do to me, it's nothing compared to what I've already survived. The absolute certainty in his voice made Mara's throat tight. He'll come back. Tonight, tomorrow, next week. He'll come back. And next time he won't be alone. Next time he'll have lawyers or police or a court order or something I can't fight. Then we'll fight it together. Evan reached across the table and took her flour-dusted hand in his. You're not alone anymore, Mara. You understand that? Whatever comes next, you don't face it alone. Mara stared at their joined hands. His was warm, solid, real. Everything Calder's touch had never been. Why are you doing this? Why are you risking everything for someone you barely know? Because Sarah made me promise not to let grief make me hollow. Because Leo needs to see that sometimes you stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. Because, he stopped, something shifting in his expression. Because you hum when you make bread, and you read bedtime stories in funny voices, and you held my son when he was crying for his mother, and somewhere in the past 3 weeks, this stopped being about helping a stranger and became about protecting someone He cut himself off. Someone who matters. The words hung in the air between them, carrying weight neither of them was quite ready to name. Outside, tires crunched on gravel again. Sheriff Tompkins, arriving right on schedule. Evan stood, still holding Mara's hand. We tell him the truth, all of it, and if he doesn't do his job, we go over his head, agreed? Mara nodded, not trusting her voice. The sheriff's interview was exactly as frustrating as Mara had feared. Tompkins listened to their account with the skeptical expression of someone who'd already decided what he believed. He took notes that looked more like doodles. He asked leading questions about whether Mara might have misunderstood Calder's intentions, whether perhaps she was confused after being away from her medication for so long, whether the stress of the situation might have made things seem worse than they were. Evan's jaw got tighter with each dismissive question. Let me make sure I understand, Evan finally said, his voice dangerously calm. A man broke into my home, assaulted a woman, attempted to forcibly remove her from my property, and your response is to ask if maybe she imagined it? Now, Evan, I'm just trying to get the full picture. The full picture is that Calder Briggs is an abuser who's been hunting his wife for 6 months. The full picture is that he lied about police reports and psychiatric evaluations that don't exist. The full picture is that if you don't do something about this, I will make damn sure everyone knows the Cedar Hollow Sheriff's Department is more interested in protecting rich men than vulnerable women. Tompkins' expression hardened. You need to be careful about making accusations like that. And you need to be careful about whose side you're on when this all comes out. Evan crossed his arms. Because it will come out. If not through you, then through someone who actually gives a damn about justice. The sheriff left 20 minutes later with a promise to look into things that fooled exactly no one. As his car disappeared down the mountain, Evan stood at the window with his hands clenched into fists. He's not going to do anything, Mara said quietly. I know. Calder's already got to him, probably been feeding him stories for months about his poor, crazy wife who needs to be brought home for her own good. I know that too. Evan turned from the window. Which is why tomorrow I'm calling every lawyer in Richmond until I find one who'll take your case. We're getting you a restraining order, divorce papers, the whole 9 yards, legal protection that even Briggs can't lie his way around. That takes time. And money I don't have. I have money. Not a lot, but enough. And time is what we buy by making sure everyone knows you're here under my protection, not his. Evan's expression softened slightly. You don't have to do this alone anymore. Stop trying to. Mara wanted to argue, wanted to insist that she couldn't accept this much help, that it wasn't fair to drag him deeper into her mess, that he'd done enough already, but the words wouldn't come. Because the truth was, she didn't want to do this alone anymore. Didn't think she could. Okay, she whispered. Okay. That night, Evan made sure every door and window was locked. He pulled the curtains closed in every room. He even dragged an old aluminum baseball bat from the garage and propped it by the front door, just in case. Leo asked approximately 40 questions about why they were having a lockdown sleepover and whether this meant they could eat ice cream for dinner and sleep in the living room like a camping trip. Evan managed to turn the whole thing into an adventure rather than the terror it actually was. And by bedtime, Leo was excited rather than frightened. But after Leo was asleep, after the cabin had settled into darkness, Evan knocked softly on Mara's door. She opened it to find him standing there with a piece of paper in his hand. I wrote this down in case... He stopped, started again. In case something happens. My lawyer's number. My brother in Tennessee. Sarah's sister who lives in Charlotte. People who would help you if I couldn't. Mara took the paper with numb fingers. Nothing's going to happen to you. Probably not, but I'm a planner. Comes with being a single parent. He offered a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I need you to promise me something. What? If Briggs comes back when I'm not here, you run. Take Leo if you can, but if you can't, you run anyway. Get somewhere safe and call one of those numbers. His voice dropped lower. Don't try to protect me by staying. Don't sacrifice yourself thinking it'll keep us safe. It won't. It'll just mean he wins. Evan, promise me, Mara. She looked into his dark eyes and saw the fear he was trying to hide. Fear for her. Fear for Leo. Fear that his choice to help her would cost more than he could afford to lose. I promise, she said, and hated that she might have to keep it. Evan nodded, then surprised her by pulling her into a brief, fierce hug. We'll get through this. I don't know how yet, but we will. He was gone before she could respond, disappearing into his own room and leaving Mara standing in her doorway with a piece of paper full of emergency numbers and the ghost of his embrace still warm against her skin. She went back to bed but couldn't sleep. Every sound outside, wind in the trees, an owl hunting, the house settling in the cold, made her jolt awake. Calder was out there somewhere, planning, scheming, finding new ways to hurt her, to reclaim her, to prove that she could never really escape. But she wasn't the same woman who'd collapsed on a sidewalk 5 weeks ago. She'd gained weight, gained strength, gained something that might almost be hope. And more than that, she had people now. People who believed her. People who were willing to stand between her and the man who'd tried to destroy her. That had to count for something. It had to. 3 days later, the message appeared on Evan's truck windshield. He'd gone into town for groceries, leaving Mara and Leo at the cabin with strict instructions to keep the doors locked. He'd been gone maybe 45 minutes when he returned to find a piece of paper tucked under his wiper blade. The message was written in block letters, thick black marker on white paper. I'll take back what's mine. Evan stood in the grocery store parking lot with the note in his hand and felt cold fury settle into his bones. This wasn't just a threat against Mara anymore. This was Briggs making it clear that he knew where Evan went, what he did, how vulnerable he was when he left his family behind. This was a declaration of war. Evan got in his truck, drove home faster than he probably should have, and found Mara and Leo exactly where he'd left them. Safe, together, playing some complicated card game that Leo had made up and that made absolutely no sense but involved a lot of dramatic storytelling. He showed Mara the note after Leo went to bed. She read it once, then again, her face going pale. He's escalating. I know. This is what he does. First the charm offensive, then the threats, then... She couldn't finish the sentence. Then nothing. Evan took the note back. Because this time, he's not dealing with an isolated woman with nowhere to turn. He's dealing with me. Evan, you can't... I can't what? Protect you? That's exactly what I'm going to do. He pulled out his phone. I'm calling that lawyer tomorrow. We're getting ahead of this, not waiting for him to make the next move. But even as he said it, they both knew it was already too late for getting ahead. Calder was in motion, had been in motion probably since the moment Evan slammed the door in his face. And whatever came next, it would come fast and hard and aimed at everything they cared about. That night, Mara stood at her bedroom window looking out at the dark forest and felt the walls closing in. Not the walls of this cabin. Those still felt safe, still felt like protection. But the larger walls of Calder's obsession, his determination, his absolute refusal to let her go. She'd been foolish to think she could ever truly escape him. Foolish to believe that kindness and safety and the warmth of Evan's kitchen could somehow make her past disappear. Calder didn't disappear. He lingered. He waited. He struck when you finally let yourself believe you were safe. Behind her, the cabin settled into sleep. Evan in his room, Leo in his, both trusting that tomorrow would be okay, that they could face whatever came next together. Mara pressed her forehead against the cold glass and made a decision she'd been avoiding for days now. If Calder wanted war, if he wanted to burn everything down to get to her, then maybe it was time to stop running, time to stop letting him dictate the terms of this fight, time to become someone who could fight back. She just had to figure out how. The answer to how came 2 days later, though not in any way Mara had expected. She was folding laundry in the living room, Leo's small t-shirts and Evan's work pants, and her own borrowed clothes that she'd slowly been replacing with items from the thrift store in town, when she heard the truck pull up outside. Evan was supposed to be in his workshop finishing a commissioned dining table, but the engine sound was wrong, too aggressive, too fast. Mara moved to the window, her body already tensing for flight, and saw not Evan's familiar truck, but Calder's black SUV. He was alone this time. No hired muscle, no witnesses. Just Calder climbing out of the driver's seat with that terrible calm purpose she recognized from 100 nights that had ended badly. Her first instinct was to run. Grab Leo from where he was playing upstairs, get out the back door, follow Evan's instructions to run, and keep running. But her feet wouldn't move. Something in her chest had gone rigid with a fury she'd been pushing down for 6 months, maybe for her entire marriage. She was so tired of running. Calder didn't knock. He tried the front door and found it locked, then moved around the side of the house toward the back. Mara heard the rattle of the back door handle, then the splintering crack of wood as he kicked it in. The sound brought Evan running from the workshop, saw in hand, his face going dark with rage when he saw the broken door. But Calder was already inside, standing in the kitchen with that sick smile on his face. "Honey, I'm home," he said, and the mockery in those words made something snap in Mara's chest. "Get out." Her voice was steady, cold. "Get out of this house right now." "This isn't your house, Mara. You're just a guest here, an unwanted guest who's overstayed her welcome." Calder's eyes found Evan in the doorway. "Isn't that right, Mr. Reyes? Aren't you tired of playing hero to my unstable wife?" "The only unstable person here is you." Evan moved into the kitchen, positioning himself between Calder and Mara. "You just broke into my home. That's a felony." "Is it? Or did I just enter a property where my legal wife is staying? Because I think a court might see it differently. Calder's smile widened, especially when that court hears how you've been harboring a mentally ill woman, keeping her from her family, possibly taking advantage of her vulnerable state. You son of a... Dad? Leo's voice came from the stairs, small and frightened. What's happening? Why is the mean man here? Everything froze. Calder's gaze swung to Leo with an expression that made Mara's blood run cold. Calculation mixed with malice. The look of someone who'd just found a new pressure point to exploit. Well, hello there, son. Calder's voice went syrupy sweet. I'm Mr. Briggs. I'm here to take Miss Mara home where she belongs. She doesn't want to go with you. Leo descended the stairs slowly, his small hands gripping the railing. She lives here now, with us. Oh, is that what she told you? Calder shook his head sadly. I'm afraid Miss Mara isn't well. She gets confused sometimes, forgets things, makes up stories. You're the one making up stories. The words burst out of Mara before she could stop them. You're the liar. You're the one who hurt me, who isolated me, who made everyone think I was crazy so they wouldn't believe me when I finally found the courage to leave. Calder's mask slipped for just a second, revealing the rage underneath. Careful, Mara. You're having one of your episodes again. We should get you somewhere you can rest, somewhere with doctors who can help. The only thing I need help with is getting rid of you. Mara stepped out from behind Evan, her whole body shaking but her voice strong. I'm done. I'm done being afraid of you. I'm done letting you control my life. I'm done running. You think you can stand up to me? You? Calder laughed, a sound like breaking glass. You're nothing, Mara. You were nothing when I found you, and you're nothing now. A scared little girl playing house with a widower who's too broken to see you for what you really are. That's enough. Evan's voice cut through the kitchen like a whip. You have exactly 5 seconds to get out before I throw you out. Touch me, and I'll have you arrested for assault. Calder pulled out his phone. In fact, I think I'll call Sheriff Tompkins right now. Tell him you're holding my wife against her will, threatening me, putting a child at risk. He didn't finish the sentence. Mara moved without thinking, grabbed the cast iron skillet from the stove, and swung it at Calder's phone. The device went flying, clattering against the wall and shattering into pieces. The skillet was heavy in her hands, solid, real. A weapon if she needed it to be. Calder stared at the broken phone, then at Mara, and something shifted in his expression. The mask fell away completely, revealing the monster underneath. You stupid bitch. That was $1,000 phone. Send me the bill. Mara raised the skillet higher. Along with your divorce papers. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Calder lunged. Evan intercepted him mid-stride, grabbing Calder's jacket and slamming him back against the wall hard enough to rattle the dishes in the cabinet. You don't get to touch her. Not ever again. Calder struggled, but Evan was stronger. Stronger than he looked, fueled by months of grief transformed into protective fury. They grappled, crashing into the kitchen table, and Leo screamed, Stop! Stop it! The boy was crying now, pressed against the stairway wall, watching his father fight with the kind of violence that had no place in this house, in this life. That sound, Leo's terrified crying, cut through Mara's rage like cold water. This wasn't right. This wasn't what she wanted. Not violence in front of a child. Not this cabin that had been a sanctuary turning into a battlefield. Not Evan risking everything because she'd been too broken to save herself. Evan, stop. She dropped the skillet with a clang. Please, Leo's scared. Just stop. Evan froze, his fist drawn back, Calder pinned beneath him. His eyes found Leo's tear-streaked face, and something crumbled in his expression. He released Calder and stepped back, breathing hard. Calder straightened slowly, blood trickling from his split lip, his expensive jacket torn. But instead of attacking again, he just stood there staring at Mara with an expression she'd never seen before. Something broken. Something almost lost. Why? His voice came out hoarse. Why wasn't I enough? I gave you everything. A home, security, love. What more did you want? The question was so absurd, so utterly divorced from reality, that Mara almost laughed. You gave me bruises and terror and a lifetime of trauma. That's not love, Calder. That's ownership. I never meant to hurt you. You You made me so angry sometimes. The way you'd look at me, like you were judging me, like you thought you were better than me. So you hit me. Mara's voice was flat. You isolated me from everyone I loved. You convinced an entire town I was mentally ill. You hunted me for 6 months when all I wanted was to be free of you. Because you're mine. Calder took a step toward her, and both Evan and Mara tensed. You're my wife. You promised till death do us part. You don't get to just leave because things got hard. Things didn't get hard. You got violent. Mara held her ground. And I'm not yours. I never was. I was a person you possessed, a thing you controlled, but I was never yours. Something in Calder's face twisted. For a moment, Mara thought he was going to attack again. Then, shockingly, his eyes filled with tears. I'm just like him. God help me, I'm just like my father. The words hung in the air, raw and terrible. Evan's posture shifted from protective to wary. What are you talking about? My father. Calder's voice cracked. He used to beat my mother. I'd hide in my room and listen to her cry, and I swore I'd never be like him. That I'd be different. Better. He looked at his hands like they belonged to someone else. But here I am, breaking into houses, terrorizing a woman, making a child cry, becoming the monster I spent my whole life trying not to be. Mara wanted to feel sympathy, wanted to believe this was some genuine moment of clarity, but she'd seen Calder perform too many times, had fallen for his tears and apologies and promises to change, only to find herself on the floor the next time she said something he didn't like. That's very tragic, she said coldly, but it doesn't excuse anything you've done to me. I know. Calder sank into one of the kitchen chairs like his legs couldn't hold him anymore. I know it doesn't. Nothing excuses it. He pressed his hands to his face. I need help, real help, not just anger management classes or therapy that I lie my way through, actual help. Evan crossed his arms, skeptical. So get help, but get it somewhere far away from Mara. I will. Calder looked up, his face blotchy and red. I'll leave. I'll go to that facility in West Virginia my doctor recommended years ago. The one for people with violent tendencies. I'll check myself in. Stay as long as they tell me to, and I'll sign whatever divorce papers you want, Mara. Give you whatever settlement makes this right. Nothing makes this right, Mara said, but you leaving would be a start. Leo had stopped crying, watching the adults with wide, confused eyes. Evan pulled his son close, one hand protective on the boy's shoulder. Calder stood slowly, moving toward the broken back door. He paused at the threshold, looking back at Mara one last time. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't mean anything anymore. But I am. You deserved better than what I gave you. You deserved... His voice broke. You deserved to be loved without fear. I hope you find that. Then he was gone, walking out into the afternoon light and leaving behind nothing but the broken door and the wreckage of everything he'd touched. They stood in the kitchen for a long moment, nobody speaking. Then Leo said in a small voice, Is the mean man really gone? Yeah, buddy. Evan's voice was rough. He's really gone. Good. Leo pressed closer to his father. I didn't like him. Me neither. Mara found herself sitting down hard in the nearest chair, all the adrenaline draining out of her at once. Her hands were shaking again, but this time from relief rather than fear. He'll come back. This is just another manipulation. Maybe. Evan moved to the window, watching Calder's SUV disappear down the mountain road. Or maybe seeing his own reflection finally broke through whatever delusion he'd been living in. He turned back to Mara. Either way, we're getting that restraining order. Tomorrow. And we're fixing that door today. And He stopped, something shifting in his expression. We're going to be okay. All of us. But 3 days later, word came that Calder had done exactly what he'd promised. He'd checked himself into a long-term psychiatric facility in West Virginia, signed over power of attorney to his lawyer, and put his house in Cedar Hollow up for sale. The mill manager position had been quietly filled by someone else. It was like Calder Briggs had simply erased himself from the town's landscape. Sheriff Tompkins came by to tell them, his expression somewhere between sheepish and relieved. Seems like your situation resolved itself, Evan. Briggs left instructions with his lawyer to cooperate with any divorce proceedings Mara wants to initiate. Even agreed to a no-contest separation with her keeping everything she came into the marriage with. How convenient, Mara said, not quite believing it. He just gave up? Apparently the facility he checked into is one of those intensive programs. 6 months minimum stay, no contact with the outside world, except through approved channels. Tompkins shifted uncomfortably. For what it's worth, I'm sorry I didn't listen earlier. Should have known something wasn't right when a man that successful spends 6 months hunting his wife instead of just moving on. After the sheriff left, Evan and Mara sat on the porch watching Leo play in the yard with a stick he'd decided was a magic wand. The spring thaw had finally arrived, turning the world green and new. Do you think he meant it? Mara asked. About getting help? I don't know. Evan was quiet for a moment. Part of me wants to believe people can change, that hitting rock bottom can wake someone up to what they've become. But I also know that abusers are really good at saying whatever they need to say to regain control. So we just wait and see if he comes back. We wait and see. But we also live our lives in the meantime. We don't let the fear of what might happen stop us from living now. He glanced at her. That lawyer I contacted. She says your case for divorce is solid. With Calder's cooperation and the documented evidence of the break-in, we can probably have preliminary papers filed within the month. Mara absorbed this, the word divorce feeling both terrifying and liberating. And then what? Then you're free. Evan said it simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Then you get to decide what your life looks like without someone else dictating the terms. I don't know what that looks like anymore. Neither did I, after Sarah died. Evan's voice went soft. Took me a long time to figure out that life doesn't have to look like anything specific. It just has to be yours. They sat in silence for a while, watching Leo perform elaborate magic spells on a patient tree. The spring air smelled like pine and thawing earth and possibility. I want to stay, Mara said suddenly. Here, if that's okay. Not forever, maybe, but for a while, until I figure out what comes next. Evan turned to look at her fully. Mara, you can stay as long as you want. That guest room is yours. This house is yours. He stopped, struggling with words. You're part of this family now. Have been for a while, really. Leo adores you, and you? Her heart was beating too fast. And I don't want you to leave just because the threat's gone. Evan's dark eyes held hers. I want you to stay because you want to be here. Because this feels like home. Not because you're running from something, but because you're running toward something worth having. The words hung between them, weighted with meanings that went deeper than simple hospitality. Mara thought about the past month and a half, the meals shared, the routines established, the way Leo had started asking her opinion on important matters, like whether dragons would eat vegetables and if rocks really had feelings. The way Evan looked at her sometimes when he thought she wasn't watching, with an expression that held warmth and something else, something careful and tentative and almost like hope. I want to stay, she said again, softer this time. Not just until I figure things out. I want to stay because this does feel like home, because Leo makes me laugh and your coffee is terrible, but I drink it anyway and I can't remember the last time I felt this safe. My coffee is not terrible. Your coffee could strip paint. That's just because I make it strong. Evan, I'm pretty sure it's developed sentience and is plotting world domination. He laughed, the sound surprised and genuine, and Mara felt something warm bloom in her chest. This ease, this ability to joke and tease without fear of consequences, this was what normal felt like, what love was supposed to feel like if she was brave enough to name it that. Stay, Evan said, his voice going serious again. Stay, and we'll figure out the details as we go. I'm not asking for anything except... He paused, choosing his words carefully. Except the chance to see where this goes. Whatever this is. This was dangerous. This was terrifying. This was everything Mara had convinced herself she could never have again. Trust and safety, and the beginning of something that might, eventually, turn into love. But then again, 2 months ago, she'd been starving on a sidewalk, and now she was sitting on a porch in the spring sunshine talking about staying. If that wasn't proof that impossible things could happen, What was? Okay, she whispered. Let's figure it out together. Evan's hand found hers on the porch railing, his calloused fingers threading through hers with careful gentleness. They sat like that for a long time, watching Leo play, feeling the sun warm their faces, letting the silence speak what words couldn't yet. The divorce papers came through faster than expected. Calder's lawyer was efficient and professional, and true to his word, Calder contested nothing. The house in Richmond that Mara had shared with him went back to her. The money in their joint account, money Calder had controlled so completely that Mara had barely been allowed to access it, was split evenly. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough for Mara to start over properly if she chose to. The facility in West Virginia confirmed that Calder Briggs was indeed a patient in their intensive trauma and rehabilitation program, and that he'd signed releases allowing them to confirm his location to his estranged wife for her peace of mind. The program director, a no-nonsense woman named Dr. Patterson, even called Mara directly. I can't discuss the details of Mr. Briggs's treatment, Dr. Patterson said in her brisk clinical voice, but I can tell you that he's taking his recovery seriously. He's engaged with the program, participating in both individual and group therapy, and has been granted no-leave privileges for the duration of his stay. He will not be contacting you or anyone associated with you without explicit permission. How long is the duration of his stay? Minimum 6 months, maximum 2 years, depending on his progress and whether he chooses to continue treatment voluntarily after the initial period. A pause. For what it's worth, Ms. Ellison, I've been doing this for 20 years. I can usually tell within the first few weeks if someone is gaming the system or genuinely trying to change. Your husband, your ex-husband, seems genuinely horrified by his own behavior. That doesn't excuse what he did to you, and it doesn't mean he'll succeed in changing, but it's a start. Mara thanked her and hung up, not sure how to feel. Part of her wanted Calder to suffer, to face consequences that matched the pain he'd inflicted. But another part of her, the part that was slowly healing, slowly remembering what it felt like to be human, just wanted him to become someone who wouldn't hurt anyone else the way he'd hurt her. Either way, it wasn't her problem anymore. Spring slid into early summer, and the cabin on the mountain became more than just a refuge. It became home. Mara took over cooking duties most nights, finding joy in feeding people who appreciated her efforts rather than critiqued them. She planted a garden behind the cabin, coaxing tomatoes and peppers and herbs from the rocky soil. Leo helped, his small hands digging in the dirt with serious concentration, asking questions about photosynthesis and whether worms got lonely and if they could plant a money tree because wouldn't that be useful? Evan finished his commissioned pieces and started taking custom orders specifically because Mara had helped him set up a basic website and social media presence. The 21st century called, she'd teased him. It wants you to stop hiding your talent in the mountains. I wasn't hiding. I was being selectively available. You were hiding. Maybe a little. They found rhythms that worked. Evan in his workshop during the day while Leo was at school, and Mara tended the house and garden, then evenings together as a unit. Homework at the kitchen table. Dinner prepared jointly. Board games that Leo always won because he made up rules that guaranteed his victory. Books at bedtime, with both Evan and Mara taking turns reading chapters. It felt like a family. It felt like the life Mara had once imagined for herself before Calder had twisted her dreams into nightmares. But she was careful. Careful not to overstep. Careful not to assume this was permanent. Careful with her own heart and with Evan's, knowing that both had been broken too recently to be careless with. Until one evening in June when Leo finally asked the question Mara had been dreading. They were sitting on the porch again, this time with ice cream, Leo's solution to all of life's important moments. Evan had taken Leo into town for a haircut and ice cream, and they'd brought back a pint of butter pecan for Mara. Miss Mara, Leo said, his spoon scraping the bottom of his bowl. Are you going to marry my dad? Mara choked on her ice cream. Evan froze with his spoon halfway to his mouth. Leo, Evan started, but his son barreled on. Because Marcus's mom got remarried last year, and now Marcus has a stepdad and a new baby sister, and I was thinking maybe if you married Dad, I could have a mom again and maybe a sister too? Or a brother. I'm flexible. We haven't... Evan looked at Mara helplessly. Buddy, That's not how it works. Why not? Leo's logic was 7-year-old airtight. You like Miss Mara. She likes you. She's basically already my mom, except you haven't made it official. So just make it official, and then we can have a normal family like everyone else. We are a normal family, Mara managed to say through her mortification. We don't need to be married for that. But it would be better if you were. Leo looked between them with the frank honesty of someone who hadn't learned to hide his feelings yet. Dad's happier now. He smiles the real smiles, not the sad ones. And you're not scared anymore. And I like having you here. I don't want you to leave. I'm not leaving, Mara said softly. Marriage or not, I'm not leaving. Promise? She met Evan's eyes over Leo's head, saw something vulnerable and hopeful there. I promise. Leo seemed satisfied with that and went back to his ice cream. But later, after he'd gone to bed and Evan and Mara were washing dishes side by side in the kitchen, Evan spoke quietly. I'm sorry about that. I've tried to teach him about boundaries, but he tends to say exactly what he's thinking. It's okay. He's 7. 7-year-olds aren't known for their subtlety. Mara handed him a clean plate to dry. But for what it's worth, he's not wrong about me being happier. I am. Happier than I've been in years. Me too. Evan was quiet for a moment. Sarah and I, we had a good marriage, a real partnership. When she died, I thought that was it for me. Thought I'd used up my allotment of love and would just coast through the rest of my life going through the motions. He set down the dish towel and turned to face her fully. Then you showed up on a sidewalk, and suddenly I remembered what it felt like to care about someone, to want to protect someone, to... He stopped, searching for words. To what? To imagine a future that isn't just survival. His dark eyes held hers. I'm not asking you to marry me, not yet. Maybe not ever, if that's not what you want. But I'm asking if you might consider this being permanent, the 3 of us, this life we're building. Mara's heart was doing something complicated in her chest. I'm still technically married. The papers are filed, but they won't be final for another few months. I know. I'm not asking for right now. I'm asking for eventually. And if I'm too broken, if the things Calder did to me have damaged me beyond repair, and I can never be the partner you deserve... Evan reached out and gently took her face in his hands, thumbs brushing her cheekbones. Then we'll be broken together, and we'll heal together, however long it takes, whatever it looks like. Mara let herself lean into his touch, let herself believe in the possibility he was offering. Eventually, she whispered, ask me eventually, and I'll give you an answer. Deal. He kissed her then, soft and careful and achingly gentle. Not possessive like Calder's kisses had been, but reverent, like she was something precious, something to be cherished rather than owned. When they pulled apart, Mara was crying, but they were good tears this time. Healing tears, the kind that washed away old pain and made room for something new. That night, lying in bed in her room that was becoming less of a guest room and more of just her room, Mara thought about the woman she'd been 2 months ago, starving, voiceless, convinced she would die on Cedar Hollow's streets because the whole world had turned against her. That woman felt like a stranger now. The woman she was becoming, the one who planted gardens and cooked meals and kissed Evan Reyes in his kitchen while promising him an eventual answer to an eventual question. That woman was stronger, braver, more whole than she'd ever been, even before Calder, because she'd been broken and had survived the breaking, had found people who'd helped her piece herself back together, had learned that sometimes salvation came in the form of a single father who bought you a sandwich and said 4 simple words. You're coming home with me. Outside her window, the summer night sang with crickets and distant owls. Inside the cabin, Evan and Leo slept, their presence a constant reminder that she was safe, she was seen, she was home. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Mara fell asleep without fear, without nightmares, without the weight of Calder's shadow crushing the breath from her lungs. Just sleep, deep and dreamless, and blessedly, beautifully free. The summer days grew longer and warmer, and with them came a sense of peace that Mara had to keep reminding herself was real. Every morning she woke expecting the other shoe to drop, expecting Calder to reappear or some new catastrophe to shatter the fragile happiness she'd built. But the days passed quietly, marked by nothing more dramatic than Leo's scraped knees and Evan's occasional mishaps in the workshop, and the tomatoes in Mara's garden slowly ripening from green to red. The divorce became final on a Tuesday in late July. Mara had expected to feel something momentous when the papers arrived, relief or triumph or at least some sense of closure. Instead, she felt only a quiet settling, like a book closing on a chapter she'd been ready to finish for a long time. She was no longer Mara Briggs. She was just Mara Ellison again, the name she'd been born with, the identity Calder had tried to erase. She stood in the kitchen holding the official decree, reading the legal language that transformed 18 months of hell into a bureaucratic footnote when Evan came in from the workshop with sawdust in his hair and a question about dinner plans. He saw the papers in her hands and went still. "It's done," Mara said simply. "It's finally done." Evan crossed the kitchen in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. He didn't say anything, didn't need to. They stood like that for a long time, Mara's face pressed against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, feeling the solidity of his presence anchoring her to this new reality. "We should celebrate," Evan said finally, his voice rumbling in his chest. "Do something special. Take Leo somewhere fun. Make a whole day of it." "Like what?" "There's that water park 2 hours south. Leo's been asking about it since school let out." Evan pulled back to look at her. "Or we could do something quieter. Whatever you want, this is your day." Mara thought about it, about what she wanted, and realized with a small shock that she actually knew. For months, maybe years, she hadn't been allowed to want anything. Calder had dictated her preferences, her choices, her desires until she'd stopped having them at all. But now, standing in this kitchen with divorce papers in one hand and Evan's warmth still radiating through her, she knew exactly what she wanted. "The water park sounds perfect," she said. "Let's tell Leo." Leo's reaction to the news was predictably explosive. He literally jumped up and down in the living room, chanting, "Water park, water park, water park," until Evan had to remind him that they had neighbors, even if those neighbors were a mile away. They spent the evening planning the trip with the kind of elaborate detail usually reserved for military operations. What to pack, what time to leave, whether they should bring sandwiches or eat at the park, and most importantly, whether Leo was tall enough for all the big slides now. "I grew an inch since last year," Leo insisted, standing as tall as he possibly could. "Miss Henderson measured everyone in class. I'm definitely tall enough." "We'll see when we get there, buddy," Evan said, but he was smiling, and Mara could see the happiness in his eyes. This was good for Leo too, she realized. Good for him to see his father choosing joy, choosing to make memories instead of just surviving. They left early Saturday morning, the truck packed with towels and sunscreen and Leo's endless enthusiasm. The drive south took them out of the mountains and into rolling farmland, past small towns that looked like postcards and billboards advertising everything from Jesus to BBQ joints to cheap fireworks. Leo kept up a running commentary from the back seat about everything he saw, his imagination turning ordinary landscapes into epic adventures. "That cow is definitely plotting something. Look at how she's staring at us." "Leo, cows don't plot." "That's what they want you to think, Dad. It's the perfect cover." Mara found herself laughing more than she had in years, real laughter that came from her belly and left her breathless. Evan kept glancing over at her with this expression she was learning to recognize, soft and warm and full of something that looked a lot like love. The water park was chaos in the best way. Families everywhere, kids screaming with delight, the smell of chlorine and sunscreen and overpriced food. Leo dragged them from one attraction to another with the boundless energy of someone who'd been waiting his entire life for this day. They rode the lazy river together, Leo floating on his inner tube between Evan and Mara, pointing out interesting clouds and asking if they thought fish would enjoy water slides. "Fish basically live on a water slide, Jati," Evan pointed out. "Their whole life is sliding through water." "Yeah, but do they enjoy it, or is it just like their commute to work?" "I don't think fish have jobs, buddy." "How do you know? Maybe they're all employed by the ocean and we just don't understand their economy." They ate overpriced pizza for lunch, and Mara didn't even care about the cost, because Leo was so happy, and Evan was so relaxed, and for once, for maybe the first time in her entire adult life, She felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The big slide, the one that required you to be at least 48 inches tall, was Leo's ultimate goal. He'd been talking about it since they arrived, working up his courage, watching other kids fly down the massive tube with expressions that wavered between terror and ecstasy. When they finally got to the measuring station, Leo stood as tall as he possibly could, barely breathing. The attendant, a teenage girl with a kind face, measured him carefully. 48 1/4 inches. You're good to go, little man. Leo's whoop of triumph probably carried to the parking lot. I'm going with him, Evan said to Mara. You want to come? Mara looked up at the towering slide, at the near-vertical drop that made her stomach clench just thinking about it, and felt the old fear trying to rise. Calder would have made fun of her for being scared, would have either forced her to go while mocking her terror, or refused to let her go and then spent the rest of the day reminding her how weak she was. But Evan just waited, his hand finding hers, his expression patient. I'm scared of heights, Mara admitted. Then stay here and watch. We'll wave at you from the top. No judgment, no pressure, just acceptance. Or, Mara heard herself say, surprising herself, maybe I'll try it anyway. Maybe it's time to stop letting fear make my decisions for me. Evan's smile was brilliant. Yeah? Yeah. She squeezed his hand. Let's do this before I change my mind. The climb to the top was terrifying. The slide when they finally got there was even worse. A nearly straight drop into darkness followed by twists and turns that defied physics. Leo went first, his small body disappearing into the tube with a shriek of pure joy. Evan went next, and then it was Mara's turn. She stood at the top, heart hammering, every instinct screaming at her to climb back down. But then she thought about the woman she'd been 3 months ago, so broken she couldn't even speak. Thought about all the times she'd let fear control her, all the ways she'd made herself smaller to accommodate Calder's rage. She sat down at the edge of the slide. You got this, ma'am, the attendant said encouragingly. Mara closed her eyes and pushed off. The drop was terrifying and exhilarating and absolutely insane. She screamed the whole way down, a sound of pure adrenaline and fear and unexpected joy. The tube twisted and turned in the darkness, and she couldn't tell which way was up, couldn't control anything, could only surrender to the experience and trust that she'd come out the other side. When she finally shot out into the landing pool, she came up gasping and laughing and completely disoriented. Evan was there immediately, his hand steadying her, his face split in a grin. You did it! I did it? Mara was shaking, but in a good way. The fear transformed into something bright and alive. Oh my God, I did it! Leo splashed over to them, his whole face glowing. That was so cool. Can we go again? They went again and again. And by the 4th time, Mara wasn't scared anymore. She was just present, just alive, just a woman sliding down a water slide with people she loved, making memories that would matter. The drive home was quieter, Leo dozing in the back seat, exhausted from the day's adventures. Mara leaned against the window, watching the mountains rise up to meet them as they climbed back toward the cabin. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that looked almost unreal. Thank you, she said quietly. For today. For everything. Evan glanced over at her. You don't have to thank me. This is what family does. Family. The word settled into Mara's chest, warm and solid. She'd lost her family when Calder isolated her from them, when his lies had poisoned every relationship she'd valued. But maybe family wasn't just the people you were born to. Maybe it was also the people you chose, the people who chose you back, the ones who stood beside you when everything fell apart and helped you build something new from the wreckage. That night, after Leo was in bed, after the dishes were done and the day's towels were hanging on the porch to dry, Evan asked Mara to come outside with him. They sat on the porch steps, the summer night alive with the sound of crickets and the cool mountain breeze carrying the scent of pine. I have something for you, Evan said, pulling a small box from his pocket. Mara's heart jumped. Evan? It's not what you think. Well, it is, but also it isn't. He opened the box to reveal a ring, simple silver with a small stone that caught the porch light and threw it back in rainbow colors. It's an opal. Leo helped me pick it out. He said it looked like all the colors of healing put together. Evan, Mara's voice came out choked. I'm not asking you to marry me, not yet. You said to ask eventually, and we're not there yet, but I wanted you to have this anyway. A promise ring, I guess. A symbol that I'm serious about this, about us, about whatever future we're building together. He took the ring from the box, holding it between them. No pressure, no expectations. Just a reminder that you're loved, Mara, completely and without conditions. For exactly who you are. Mara looked at the ring, at Evan's face in the dim light, at the cabin behind them where Leo slept peacefully. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the pain and fear and slow climb back to herself. Thought about the woman who'd collapsed on a sidewalk and the man who'd said 5 words that changed everything. Pack your things, you're coming home. This was home. This porch, this man, this life they were creating together. Not because she needed saving, but because they were choosing to save each other every single day. Yes, she whispered, holding out her hand. Yes to the ring. Yes to the promise. Yes to eventually. Evan slid the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, the opal catching the light and transforming it into something beautiful. He kissed her then, slow and deep and full of all the things they hadn't yet said but both understood. When they finally pulled apart, Mara was crying again, but they were good tears. Healing tears, the kind that washed away the last remnants of who she'd been forced to be and made room for who she was choosing to become. I love you, she said, the words coming easier than she'd expected. I love you and Leo and this life we're building. I love waking up without fear and going to sleep without nightmares. I love your terrible coffee and Leo's ridiculous questions and the way you look at me like I'm something precious instead of something broken. You are precious. Evan's thumb brushed away her tears. And you were never broken, Mara. You were bent by someone who didn't deserve you, but you never broke. You survived. You fought. You found your way to the one place where you could finally heal. I found my way to you. We found our way to each other. He pulled her close, and they sat like that on the porch steps, wrapped in each other, and the summer night, and the quiet knowledge that they'd survived the worst and come through it stronger. The months that followed were marked by small, ordinary miracles. Mara's garden produced more tomatoes than 3 people could possibly eat, so she started making sauce and giving jars to neighbors who slowly became friends. Evan's woodworking business grew as word spread about his craftsmanship, and Mara took over managing his orders and client communications, turning his workshop into a legitimate small business. Leo started 3rd grade and proudly told everyone that his dad had a girlfriend now, which always made Mara blush and Evan grin. In September, they got a letter from Dr. Patterson at the treatment facility. Calder had successfully completed the intensive 6-month program and was transitioning to outpatient care. He'd signed over the Richmond house to Mara completely, along with a settlement that was generous without being overwhelming. The letter included a note from Calder himself, brief, carefully worded, probably reviewed by multiple therapists. Mara, I don't expect forgiveness, and I don't deserve it. I'm writing only to let you know that I take full responsibility for the pain I caused you. I'm working every day to become someone who would never hurt another person the way I hurt you. I hope you found the peace and safety you deserve. I hope you're building the life I should have helped you build instead of tearing you down. I won't contact you again unless you initiate it. Be well. Calder. Mara read the letter twice, then set it aside. She felt nothing, no anger, no fear, no satisfaction, just a quiet acknowledgement that this chapter was truly, finally closed. Calder was getting help. Good. He was leaving her alone. Better. She was free to move forward without his shadow following her. You okay? Evan asked, watching her face. I'm okay. And she was. More than okay. She was healing. She was whole. She was home. That winter, as snow began to fall on the mountains and Leo started his Christmas wish list that somehow included 17 items all related to dragons, Evan asked Mara a question she'd been expecting for months. They were in the kitchen, where all their most important conversations seemed to happen, making dinner together. Leo was at a friend's house for a sleepover, which was rare and precious. The house felt different with just the 2 of them, more intimate, more adult. Evan had made a nice dinner, had even bought wine from the store in town, and Mara had known something was coming. Remember when I said I'd ask eventually? Evan set down the wooden spoon he'd been using to stir pasta sauce. Mara's heart started beating faster. I remember. I think eventually is now. He pulled a small box from his pocket, different from the promise ring box, but similar. I've been thinking about what you said at the water park, about not letting fear make your decisions. And I realized I've been letting fear make mine too. Fear that it was too soon, that I was dishonoring Sarah's memory, that I didn't deserve to be this happy again. He opened the box to reveal a ring, simple gold with 3 small diamonds. But then I remember that Sarah made me promise not to let grief make me hollow. And loving you doesn't make me hollow. It makes me whole again. Mara's eyes filled with tears. You know, Leo, Evan continued, a smile playing at his lips. You know my coffee is terrible, and I sometimes work too late, and I still have moments where I miss Sarah so much I can't breathe. You know I'm not perfect, that this life isn't perfect, that we're both carrying scars that will probably never fully fade. He took her hand, the one already wearing the promise ring. But here's what I know about you. You're strong enough to survive hell and brave enough to trust again. You make Leo laugh, and you make me remember what joy feels like. You turn tomatoes into sauce, and my chaos into order, and this house into a home. He met her eyes. Marry me, Mara. Not because you need protection or I need saving, but because we choose each other every day for all the days we have left. Mara looked at the ring, at Evan's face, at the kitchen where they'd had so many conversations, where she'd learned to speak again, where she'd slowly remembered what it felt like to be loved without fear. She thought about the woman she'd been 9 months ago, dying on a sidewalk, voiceless and hopeless. Thought about the woman she was now, gardener, cook, partner, almost mother to a boy who believed cows plotted world domination. Yes, she said, her voice strong and clear. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes to all of it. Evan slid the ring onto her finger beside the opal, and it fit perfectly, like it had been waiting for her all along. Then he kissed her, and the pasta sauce started to burn, and they both started laughing because of course it did, because life was messy and imperfect, and sometimes things burned while you were busy being happy. They got married in the spring, almost exactly a year after Mara had first arrived at the cabin. It was a small ceremony in the backyard, under the apple tree that was just starting to bloom. Leo was the ring bearer, taking his job with the kind of serious dedication usually reserved for presidential inaugurations. A handful of neighbors came, and Evan's brother drove up from Tennessee, and somehow Sheriff Tompkins showed up with his wife and a casserole and a sheepish apology for not believing Mara sooner. Sarah's sister came too, bringing photographs and stories, and the blessing that Evan had been afraid to ask for but desperately needed. She would have loved you, she told Mara, holding both her hands. She would have been so happy that Evan found someone who makes him smile like this again. Mara wore a simple white dress she'd bought at a boutique in town. Nothing fancy, nothing expensive. Evan wore a suit he'd owned for years but had tailored to fit better. Leo wore khakis and a button-down shirt and lasted approximately 45 minutes before declaring formal wear to be the worst invention in human history and changing into his regular clothes. There was no DJ, no elaborate reception, no stress about seating charts or color schemes. Just neighbors and food and music from someone's iPhone and dancing in the grass as the sun set over the mountains. Mara danced with Evan, with Leo, with Evan's brother who told embarrassing stories about Evan's childhood, with Sheriff Tompkins who apologized again and promised to do better. At the end of the night, after the guests had left and Leo was asleep upstairs still wearing his khakis because he'd fallen asleep before finishing his clothing protest, Evan and Mara stood on the porch looking out at their land. Mrs. Reyes, Evan said, testing out the name. That's me. Mara leaned into his warmth. Though I'm keeping Ellison professionally, the garden business is registered under that name now. The garden business that consists of you giving away free vegetables to half the county? It's a work in progress. Eventually I'll charge money, probably. Uh-huh. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out one by one over the mountains. Somewhere in the forest, an owl called. In the house behind them, Leo murmured something in his sleep about dragons and vegetables. Do you ever think about her? Mara asked quietly. About what she'd think of all this? Evan was quiet for a moment. Every day. But not in the way you might think. I think about how she loved fully, without reservations, without fear. How she'd be angry if I'd let her death turn me into someone who was afraid to love again. He looked down at Mara. I think she'd be happy. I think she'd tell me I chose well. And I think she'd tell you that you saved us as much as we saved you. Did I? Leo hasn't had a nightmare about losing his mom in months. I haven't spent a night sitting in the workshop staring at wood. I couldn't bring myself to work. This house feels alive again instead of like a museum to grief. Evan kissed the top of her head. Yeah, Mara, you saved us. Mara thought about that, about the idea that salvation went both ways, that healing wasn't something you did alone, but something you built together with people who loved you enough to be patient with your broken places. I used to think happiness was something you earned, she said softly, something you had to be good enough for, perfect enough for. Calder reinforced that, made me feel like I was always failing, always falling short of some impossible standard. And now? Now I think happiness is something you choose, something you build, one small moment at a time, like planting a garden and watching things grow, like making terrible coffee and drinking it anyway because the person who made it loves you, like dancing in the grass at your own wedding and not caring that your hair got messed up or your shoes got muddy. Your hair looked beautiful messy. Liar. But she was smiling. Okay, yes, I'm lying. You had grass in your hair and Leo stepped on your dress at least twice. You were a disaster. Evan grinned. You were also the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. They went inside eventually, the spring night getting too cool even for mountain people. They checked on Leo one more time, still asleep, still wearing those khakis, one arm flung over the edge of the bed. They turned off lights and locked doors and made their way to the bedroom that was now officially theirs together, not just Evan's with Mara visiting. That night, lying in the darkness with Evan's warmth beside her and the sounds of the mountain settling into sleep around them, Mara thought about the journey that had brought her here. 5 days without food. 6 months running. One man who'd seen her when no one else would and had said the words that saved her life. Pack your things, you're coming home. But the truth was, she'd saved herself too. Had found the strength to survive, to keep going, to trust again when trust seemed impossible. Had chosen healing over bitterness, hope over despair, love over the fear that she'd never deserve it. Evan, she whispered into the darkness. Do you think he'll come back? Calder. Do you think he's really changed, or do you think someday he'll show up again? Evan was quiet for a moment, his hand finding hers under the covers. I don't know. Maybe he has changed. Maybe seeing himself clearly for the first time broke something open in him that needed breaking. Or maybe he's just better at hiding now. He squeezed her hand. But here's what I know for sure. If he does come back, he's not getting you. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. Because you're not the woman he destroyed. You're the woman who survived him, who rebuilt herself, who became stronger in all the broken places. We became stronger, Mara corrected. All three of us. Together. Together, Evan agreed. Outside, the wind moved through the trees with a sound like breathing. Inside, the Reyes family slept. A man who'd lost his wife but found love again. A boy who'd lost his mother but gained someone who loved him just as fiercely. And a woman who'd lost everything only to discover that sometimes you have to be completely broken before you can become whole. They'd all been broken in different ways. All been scarred by loss and pain and the particular cruelty of a world that took more than it gave. But they'd found each other in their brokenness, had built something new from the fragments of their shattered lives. Not because someone rescued them, though rescue had played its part, but because they'd chosen to rescue each other every single day. In small ways and large. In morning coffee and bedtime stories and gardens that grew despite the rocky soil. In promises kept and fears faced and love given without conditions or expectations. This was what healing looked like. Not perfect, not without scars, but real and hard-won and absolutely worth fighting for. Mara closed her eyes and let sleep take her, secure in the knowledge that when she woke, she'd wake to sunlight and Evan's smile and Leo's inevitable question about whether cereal counted as soup and why or why not. She'd wake to a life she'd chosen, in a home she'd helped build, with people who loved her not despite her broken places, but including them. She'd wake to her life, her real life, the one she'd almost given up on but had somehow, impossibly, been brave enough to claim. And that, more than anything, was enough. More than enough. It was everything.